What's up, y'all? This is Reggie White, aka Bullet, aka Speeding Bullet, and this is the Speeding Bullet podcast channel. We're going to be jumping into a video real quick that I think is a conversation that we need to have, and it is Israel, Palestine, and black people. How should black people think and feel about this conflict between Israel and Palestine? Should we be sitting this one out? Should we have no opinion? Should we be supporting a particular side? Should we be standing in solidarity with some of the groups that have been standing in solidarity with blacks throughout history. But before we even jump into that part, what I wanted to do was make a video just about some of the history involved with this conflict. Also, to define and talk about some terms that you may hear in reference to this conflict. So we're gonna jump right into that. We're gonna talk about some of these ideas, some of these terms, and then we're gonna talk about how should black people feel about the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Thanks. What's up, y'all? This is Reggie White, aka Bullet, aka Speeding Bullet, and this is the Speeding Bullet podcast channel. Thanks for tuning in. Appreciate everyone who has liked and subscribed to the channel. Everyone that has been a part of the conversation, and everyone who has engaged me personally, either through phone calls, texts, emails, in-person suggestions, and just overall excitement about what we're doing here with this channel. So don't forget to like if you think that this is the type of conversation that you enjoy having. Don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified whenever we post any new videos, and don't forget to engage with the channel by commenting. Whether or not you see this on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, don't hesitate to subscribe and keep this thing going. So one of the things I want to talk about, and something that I've been wanting to discuss for a while, just because it's in the news, it's probably the biggest news story of the last 3 months, and something that I feel like is important to black people, but also just important to the average person that may have questions or any comments, or just want to have dialogue about this subject. So what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to probably make a couple of parts to this video so it's not too long of a conversation, break it down into maybe 3 different parts. But what we're going to be talking about is how black people in the United States of America should be thinking about the Israel and Hamas war conflict, however way you want to describe it. How should we as black people think about this conflict? What side of this conflict should we be on? Should we sit this one out, as some folks have said, or should we stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, or with the Israeli, or with Israel as it's composed as its nation state? What should we do? But I think before we can even have any type of conversation about where we should fall or what we should support, I think it's important to have a conversation about what it is to be. Well, what is this particular conflict? Like, how did this conflict originate? What are some of the historical markers of this conflict? And just some talking points so you can kind of know what's going on if you are speaking to someone else or having a conversation about this, what some of these terms mean, and where the history of this conflict has started. So real quick, not to get too technical, and I am not a scholar. I am not I'm not an expert on this conflict or the history. This is just things that I've picked up, folks that I've listened to and read that I respect their opinion. So I'm just giving you guys this information as it's been presented to me. But the first term we need to kind of have a conversation about is Zionism, and what Zionism is. So Zionism, kind of simply put, is the desire to have a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state. This was born out of just the desire for Jews to have a place to go where they can be safe and away from the historical prejudices and anti-Semitic behavior that has been directed towards Jews, all over the world for a long time. So this idea of a specific place for Jews to go started in the late. I mean, really picked up steam in the late 1800s. Some folks just thought about Jews being persecuted throughout the world, especially in Europe, and the thought and the question came up about where Jews could go, that they could be safe, as a whole, be safe from persecution throughout the world. But specifically, we're talking about Europe and the European Jews. So the question just originated with where should this area? It was only being described just as a myth, just as a mythological. I don't want to say not mythological, but it was just being described as a hypothetical place where this particular area for Jews would be. And some of the places when we think about that they were discussing was places in Africa. I think Uganda may have been one of the first places that the conversation was brought up about where Jews could establish something of a safe haven. So at some point, this idea started to point towards what was called Palestine back then, and more of a push towards that place being the place of the biblical Jews, and where the biblical Jews were originally where the biblical Jews originated from, according to the Bible. So, but this was just a theory. This was just a hypothetical type of conversation in the beginning, but nonetheless, a few Jews, maybe 30,000-40,000, they migrated to at that time was Palestine, and the name of that area was Palestine. It was under the Ottoman Empire's rule, which was a quote unquote or air quote Islamic empire that ruled over that part of the land. So Palestine was a part of the Ottoman Empire, and when the Ottoman Empire started to fold after the First World War, the British took over control of Palestine, and it was actually named British Palestine. There was conversation, I think, within the British government. But there was conversation to establish or to direct Jews to British Palestine as a safe haven. So there was some more migration of Jews to that particular area, but just as a form of here's a safe place. Now, you fast forward to World War II and the Holocaust and what happened during the Holocaust. I mean, we all know 6 million Jews were killed, and so many more were displaced throughout Europe, throughout the world, and it became a need for a place where Jews could live safely, because the Holocaust just really revealed a large anti-Semitic attitude towards Jews, and quite frankly, it was something that was needed at the time. So after the Holocaust, Jews started to migrate to this area that was called Palestine, and in 1948 there was a war that resulted in Jews taking over that area, which was Palestine, and being called the nation of Israel. So that's kind of a brief, I'm going to stop the history lesson right there, but kind of like a brief kind of understanding or idea of what Zionism is and how it has manifested into the state of Israel. Now, what's important to note is that Zionism is not necessarily synonymous with being a Jew. But Zionism is just that. It's a political movement. It is an idea that Jews need to or should have a place in the world that they are safe from. And I think everyone would agree that that any ethnic group or group of people should have a place that they call their own, or a place that they could be safe and have self determination and things of that nature. I think everyone would agree to that. However, the formation of Israel proved more than just a country of safe haven for Jewish people. It became a country that was exclusively for Jewish people, and also that treated others, folks who were not Jewish, as second class citizens. But we'll get into a little bit of that later. But but one thing to note about Jews is that Jews is not, being a Jew is not a monolith. So being a Jew does not necessarily mean that you are of a strict religious practice. Some Jews are secular. Some Jews are atheists. Jews as a national idea is just that people who identify with being a Jew. It's not just a religious practice. It's a cultural practice. It is a way of identifying with each other. So it's not necessarily religious. So that's something that a lot of people get a little bit hung up on the Jewish people being specifically, referencing Jewish people is referencing the Jewish religion, and it's not. There are many components within the Jewish community and the Jewish religion itself, and also those who identify as Jews who are not religious and do not have any connection to the Jewish religion. So just that Jews is not specifically just a religious belief, that it is more of a national identity of people who identify with Jews, and they are of the same sort. So just moving on to the conflict in general. And I think that the first thing that most people say about this conflict between the Israel state and Hamas is that it's complicated. And when people say that it's complicated, what that normally means is that it is just so kind of like twisted and just confusing, and there is just so many components to it that it's kind of like impossible to grasp as an understanding of what the conflict is, and that cannot be further from the truth. Now, don't get me wrong, the history has a lot of nuance to it. There has been a lot of maneuvering on both sides, on the Israeli side, on the Israel state side, on the Palestinian side, on those colonial powers who created a lot of the environment that we're seeing shape out today. So there are a lot of layers to it. But when people talk about it being complicated, I don't think that they really mean that. I think they mean that it is like morally ambiguous, or morally gray, or morally or just morally what do you call it? Just difficult to determine right from wrong in this conflict. And it's not really complicated in that sense. It's not really complicated to really examine who's right and who's wrong. And I think that when you look at Israel versus Palestine, and just the displacement of Palestinians out of what was Palestine and what became Israel in itself is a historical wrong. Whether or not you believe that Jews should have a place of of self-determination, a place of safety, that should not be brought about with the displacement, the killing of folks who are already there. Now, some folks will argue that the Jews were there first, biblically speaking, that the Jews were there first. However, within the last 100 years, it's clear that this was a migration effort and not folks who are indigenous currently in that area. So, it is what anyone would describe as a settler colonial project where you move a group of people into an area and you displace and you move those out who are currently there. So it's not really complicated in the sense of what is morally and ethically correct. I think both things can be true at the same time. Jewish people can and should have a place that they are safe in, but also that should not be at the expense of the Palestinian people and their own safety and self-determination. So when people say that this conflict is complicated, it's not really morally complicated. Now the different nuances of it can be overwhelming, but the morality of it's not really complicated at all. The next thing is that these two groups have been fighting forever. That this conflict that's just never ending has been going on since the beginning of time, and that cannot be further from the truth. There's no historical evidence that this conflict between the Israeli state and the Palestinians has been going on for more than the creation of Israel, but also the 60 years before that, just with the migration. I mean, one thing is that when it was under the Ottoman Empire, it was Palestine, that it was under British Palestine, that there wasn't a tremendous amount of conflict in that region and in that particular area with the Arabs, the Jews who were living there. That there wasn't widespread issues, there weren't widespread conflict between the groups that were there. This conflict is not something that has spanned for hundreds and hundreds of years. Those folks before the creation of Israel were able to live in the same area, worship in the same areas, and not have any of these violent issues that we have now. So I think when folks say things like this has been going on forever, I think that it kind of dismisses that there are real kind of solutions to these problems. That when you say it's been going on forever, that kind of means that there's really no solution, that there's really no there's really no path to peace in the region. There's no there's no pathway to solidarity amongst amongst the two groups. That this is something that's gonna be going on forever, and it cannot be further from the truth. I mean, the same way that the colonial folks who carved out these areas and promised these areas to certain people, and assisted and partnered with the Jewish Israel state to be able to push out the Palestinians. I think that there are political solutions that can fix this, the same way that there were political ideas and political actions that created this. But also, I think it kind of paints a picture of Jews, just paints a picture of Jews and Arabs as being something that they're not. That Jews are have been bad neighbors and they can't live amongst anyone, and there's always conflict wherever the Jews go. I think when you start to say that this has been going on forever, that leads to those types of attitudes towards Jews, but also those types of attitudes towards Arabs. That Arabs are violent. That they just do not have the ability to live with people who aren't like them or have the same beliefs or the same customs. That when you say that this been going on forever, then to me that means that you are pointing to or trying to make an equivalence that these people just are inherently violent or just are inherently conflict driven, and that cannot be further from the truth. Like I said before, the 1948 war, the Jews in the area, the Arabs, the Palestinians, they lived together. There wasn't any major issue, but the expansion and the creation of Israel created a a long created the long-standing issue that we have right now. So another thing I just want to kind of talk about and just to be able to kind of explain away an idea that's really been pushed by the Zionist national movement, is that any criticism towards Israel as the state, any criticism towards Zionism or any criticism towards the Israeli government is now being painted as anti-Semitic. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there are people in this world, unfortunately, that hate Jewish people. Those people are terrible. The ideas and the ridiculous bigotry and the ridiculous prejudice towards Jews throughout the world has been documented and continues. But to criticize a government is not to criticize the Jewish people any more than to criticize the American government is to criticize the American people. I mean, governments are one thing, people are another thing. So you can be anti-Zionist and not be anti-Jewish, because Zionism is a political movement. It is a political ideology. It is a movement that is not necessarily supported by all Jews. So we shouldn't put all Jews in that category, but also just to just to criticize what the Israeli state looks like is not a criticism of Jewish people. Now, some people might say, well, what does the Israeli state look like? Why do people criticize Israel? Why do people criticize the Israeli state? And one of the reasons is that there has been many studies on how life is in Israel for people who are non-Jewish, and that Israel is compared to South Africa during the apartheid days. That if you are not Jewish, then you do not have the same rights, you do not have the same freedoms, you do not have the same rights and freedoms as someone who is a non-Jew. So anyone that's a non-Jew in that particular area most likely is going to be a Palestinian or a Muslim. That anyone that's a non-Jew does not have the same exact rights as someone who is a Jew. Also, the criticism of the Israeli state is how it deals with its neighbors being the Palestinians. That's the Jewish neighbors, and how they deal with them, and it being a occupying power, meaning that Israel pretty much controls all of Gaza and all of the West Bank. Pretty much they control the resources, they control the air, the sea. They pretty much control all life within those two borders, and they've been controlling it ever since 1967. And what that looks like, what that feels like on the ground is an open air prison. Gaza is not allowed to have an airport. They're not allowed free access. They are just not allowed to function freely as a country. So, and that's a policy of the Israeli government and of the Israeli state. However, like I said, that's not a reflection, or that's not the entire Jewish population. I mean, some Jews are totally against the Jewish state, or against how the Jewish state is being applied within Israel, and also in how it deals with its neighbors. But also another point of reference would be the Palestinians. So I think that there is an idea that all Palestinians are Muslim, and that's not further from the truth. A large population, large percentage of Palestinians are Muslims, but historically Palestinians have been, have been identified in a lot of different ways. I mean, yes, a lot are Muslim, but some are Christians, some are Jews, some are atheists. So there's not this religious kind of war and conflict that people think that it is. This is a conflict about self-determination and the self-determination of your borders, and the and the idea of Israel being a settler colonial project. Now, I'm going to kind of leave it there because that is a very kind of interesting question, and a question that I'm going to leave to the group to see how do you guys feel about Israel, and whether or not, I mean, we can get into what we feel as though is the nuts and bolts of the conflict, but just one simple question. I mean, do you feel like Israel is a settler colonial project? Or do you feel like that Jews were in that area at some point and they would be considered natives to that area, so them coming back and claiming it is not the same as a settler colonial project? So let me know what you guys think about that. That's a very, very interesting question. I mean, and I think you can go a lot of different ways. I mean, you can you can use the Bible as a reference if you want. You can pull up Bible verses that say that this land was promised and will be occupied by the Jews according to the Bible. However, if you are not religious, or you don't believe in the Bible, or you believe that the Bible has its has its bias, then you may not give a lot of strength to the argument that Jews were here first, or this was promised to Jews, or anything of that nature. So I'm curious to see what you guys think on whether or not Israel is a settler colonial project, or the Jews have a right to the land as it's stated in the Bible. So I'm going to leave you guys with those thoughts. Hopefully you guys like this type of conversation. I will be having a part 2 to this, which would be, how should black people think about this conflict, and what does this conflict mean to black people, and what this conversation looked like to black people historically, from the beginning until the recent conflict. So if you like this video, don't forget to like. If you would like to know when we're going to be dropping new videos and things of that nature, don't hesitate to subscribe. And last but not least, do not hesitate to engage, comment on the channel. Let me know that you're here. Let me know whether or not you like what I'm saying. Let me know whether or not you don't like what I'm saying. But the most important thing is to have a conversation, and this conversation is for people just like me, people that care about the world, people that have an opinion about the world, and people that want to be informed about the world, but maybe don't want to hear from some some talking head, or some person that's telling you what to believe, as opposed to giving you information and soliciting your response to these questions. So once again, like, subscribe, share if you see this video and know of someone who may be interested in this type of conversation. Once again, you'll see me on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. So until then, I will see you guys later. Peace.